The Galactic Council had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. They were old. They were powerful. They had conquered and absorbed every species they had ever met. 17 different alien races sat on the council, and together they controlled more worlds than any human mind could count. They believed they knew everything about the universe. They believed nothing could threaten them. They were wrong. It started with a simple discovery. A scout ship passing through an unremarkable region of space detected strange signals coming from a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star. The signals were primitive radio waves, the kind of noise that young civilizations made before they learned to hide themselves. The Council sent observation drones to study the source. What they found made them afraid. The creatures on that blue planet called themselves humans. They were soft and fragile with short and weak bodies. By galactic standards, they were barely more than animals, but the drones recorded something that the Council had never seen before. These humans were violent in a way that understanding. Their entire history was a long story of war. They fought over land. They fought over resources. They fought over ideas. Sometimes they fought for no reason at all. They had discovered how to split atoms, and the very first thing they did was build weapons that could destroy cities. They created thinking machines and immediately taught those machines how to kill. Every other species in the galaxy had evolved past such primitive aggression. War was something ancient civilizations left behind, like childhood diseases or superstition. But humans were different. They did not grow out of their violence. They got better at it. High Arbiter of the Dominion called an emergency meeting of the full council. He was an ancient being, his body covered in bioluminescent tendrils that glowed with his emotions. Right now, those tendrils flickered with fear. "We must act now," told the assembled representatives. His voice echoed through the vast chamber where the council met, a station the size of a small moon floating in the darkness between stars. "These humans are a disease waiting to spread. Our projections show they will develop faster than light travel within 300 cycles, perhaps less. If we allow them to leave their planet, they will become a plague upon this galaxy. They will consume everything in their path." The other representatives murmured among themselves. Some were skeptical. The humans were so primitive. How could they possibly threaten the greatest civilization the universe had ever known? But then they watched the recordings. They saw humans dropping nuclear fire on their own cities. They saw soldiers charging into certain death without hesitation. They saw civilians picking up weapons and fighting invaders with nothing but rage and determination. They saw a species that had nearly destroyed itself a dozen times over and somehow kept going, kept fighting, kept finding new ways to kill. The vote was unanimous, 17-0 in favor of immediate invasion. The humans would be exterminated before they could become a threat. On Earth, nobody knew what was coming. Admiral Daniel was 53 years old and had spent his entire career in the military. He had trained for wars that never happened, prepared for enemies that never came. He was a practical man who dealt in facts and probabilities, and if someone had told him that aliens were about to invade, he would have laughed. He was not laughing when the ships appeared. The Council fleet arrived without warning. 10,000 vessels materialized in Earth's orbit, each one larger than anything humans had ever built. They were beautiful in a terrible way, their hulls gleaming with technology that humans could not begin to understand. They carried weapons that could burn entire continents to glass. Every screen on the planet flickered. Every radio crackled. Every phone and computer displayed the same message, translated into every human language simultaneously. "You have been judged. You have been found dangerous. Surrender now and your death will be quick. Resist and you will suffer." The world went mad. Governments held emergency meetings. Militaries scrambled to respond. Civilians panicked in the streets. Religious leaders declared the end times had arrived. Scientists tried desperately to understand what they were facing. In a secret facility buried deep beneath the Nevada desert, A woman named Laura Mitchell stared at the message with different eyes than most. Laura was 37 years old, a physicist who had spent the last decade of her life working on the most classified project in human history. 10 years ago, a crashed alien probe had been recovered from a remote location in Siberia. It was old and broken, probably malfunctioning for centuries before it finally fell to Earth. But it was enough. Laura had studied that probe. She had taken it apart and put it back together 1,000 times. She understood its principles, even if she could not replicate all of its technology. And now, looking at the alien fleet in orbit, she saw something that others missed. Their ships used the same basic technology as the probe. She ran to find whoever was in charge. The facility was in chaos, but she eventually located General, a stern man with gray hair and tired eyes who was trying to coordinate with the Pentagon through failing communication lines. "We can fight them," Laura said, grabbing his arm. "Their technology is advanced, but it is not magic. I have been studying it for years. Given time, I can figure out how their weapons work, how their shields work, how their engines work. We can fight them." The general looked at her like she was insane. "Fight them? Did you see how many ships they have?" "I saw, but I also know what we are. We are humans. Fighting is what we do." The general was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the first alien ships were beginning their descent through the atmosphere, heading for the major cities of Earth. "How much time do you need?" he asked. Laura thought about it. She thought about everything she knew and everything she still had to learn. Years, maybe decades. "We have 72 hours. Laura felt her heart sink. It was not enough time. It would never be enough time. But then she thought about her parents in Chicago, her sister in Boston, her nieces who were probably terrified right now. She thought about everyone she had ever known and loved. "Then I better get started," she said. The invasion of Earth was about to begin. The Council expected it to be over quickly. They expected the humans to break and surrender like every other species they had ever conquered. They had no idea what they were about to unleash. The invasion began at dawn over Beijing. The warships descended through the clouds like angry gods. They were massive, each one blocking out the sun as they lowered themselves over the city. For a moment, everything was silent. 20 million people looked up at the sky and held their breath. Then the weapons fired. Beams of pure energy cut through buildings like they were made of paper. Entire city blocks vanished in seconds, replaced by burning craters. The sound was unlike anything anyone had ever heard, a deep humming that you felt in your bones rather than heard with your ears. The Chinese military responded with everything they had. Missiles streaked up toward the alien ships. Fighter jets swarmed around the invaders. Artillery batteries fired until their barrels glowed red. But nothing worked. The missiles exploded harmlessly against invisible shields. The jets were swatted out of the sky like insects. The artillery might as well have been throwing rocks. Beijing fell in 6 hours. 12 million people died. The pattern repeated across the world. Moscow was next. The Russian military had always been proud of their strength, but their strength meant nothing against an enemy from the stars. The city burned while soldiers watched helplessly, their weapons useless. London fell by evening. Paris fell an hour later. Berlin, Rome, Madrid, they all went dark one by one. The invaders moved with terrible efficiency, destroying military targets and population centers with equal precision. New York held out the longest. Admiral Daniel was coordinating the defense from a bunker in Colorado when he received the reports from Manhattan. The National Guard had set up defensive positions throughout the city. The Navy had moved every available ship into the harbor. For 12 hours they fought. They knew they could not win. Their weapons could not penetrate the alien shields. Their aircraft could not match the enemy's speed. But they fought anyway because that was what humans did. Brooks was a Marine sergeant stationed at a forward position near Central Park when the final assault came. He was 28 years old and had served 2 tours overseas. He had seen combat before, but nothing had prepared him for this. The aliens themselves were terrifying. They were tall and thin, with too many joints in their limbs and faces that seemed designed to inspire fear. Their armor made them look like nightmares given physical form. They moved through the streets of New York like predators, their weapons humming with deadly energy. Watched his squad die one by one. Every time they took a shot, the enemy found them. Every time they moved, the enemy followed. It was like fighting ghosts who could see through walls. By the third day, New York was silent. 300 million humans died in the first week. The number doubled by the end of the month. But humanity did not surrender. Something strange happened in those dark days. Old enemies became friends. Nations that had threatened each other for generations suddenly found common cause. Russian submarines surfaced alongside American carriers. Chinese hackers worked with Pentagon analysts. Indian and Pakistani soldiers fought side by side. Israeli and Iranian troops defended the same positions. The aliens had expected humans to turn on each other in the chaos. Every other species they had conquered had done exactly that. Panic and fear had always driven primitives to betray their own kind. Humans were different. Brooks survived the fall of New York by retreating into the subway tunnels. He found other survivors there, soldiers and civilians mixed together, all of them united by a single purpose. They would not give up. They would not stop fighting. For 3 months, they waged guerrilla war against the occupation forces. They planted bombs. They ambushed patrols. They stole equipment and learned how to use it. They could not win any major battles, but they could make the enemy bleed. "They think we are beaten," told his people one night as they huddled in an abandoned station deep underground. "They think we will break, but they do not understand us. We have been fighting each other for thousands of years. We know how to lose, we know how to suffer, and we know how to come back." Meanwhile, in the bunker beneath Nevada, Laura Mitchell worked without sleep. The facility had been cut off from the surface when the invasion began, but it had enough supplies to last for years. More importantly, it had the alien probe and all of Laura's research. She was not alone. A team of scientists and engineers worked beside her, people who had dedicated their lives to understanding technology that should have been impossible. And now they had new material to study. Resistance fighters across the globe had begun capturing alien equipment. Weapons, armor, communication devices, even damaged vehicles. It was dangerous work. Many died getting these prizes to the hidden facilities where scientists waited. But slowly, piece by piece, humanity began to understand what they were fighting. Their shields work by bending space around them, Laura explained to General during one of their rare video conferences. Our weapons cannot penetrate because they are not hitting the ships at all. They are being deflected into another dimension. "Can we build something that will work?" the general asked. "Maybe, but it will take time." Time was something they did not have. The council grew impatient. The humans were supposed to have surrendered by now. Instead, they kept fighting. Every conquered city every occupied territory became a nightmare of ambushes and sabotage. High Arbiter ordered a change in strategy. If the humans would not submit, they would be exterminated completely. No survivors, no mercy. The death toll climbed into the billions. On the 93rd day of the occupation, Laura Mitchell made a breakthrough. She was studying a captured engine component when she finally understood how the alien drives worked. They did not push ships through space like human rockets. They folded space itself, bringing distant points together and slipping through the gap. "I can build one," she whispered, her hands trembling as she held the component. "I can build a ship that travels faster than light." She contacted Admiral immediately. The Admiral had aged 10 years in 3 months. His eyes were hollow. His voice was tired. But when he heard what Laura had discovered, Something sparked back to life in him. "If we cannot win on Earth," he said slowly, "then we take the fight somewhere else." Laura nodded. "We build ships, we evacuate everyone we can. We hide in the darkness between stars, and we learn, we grow, we prepare." "And then?" Laura's eyes hardened. "And then we come back." Project Exodus was born in that moment. Humanity was about to make its first journey to the stars, not as explorers or pioneers, but as refugees fleeing the destruction of their home. But refugees can become something else. They can become an army. The ships were ugly. Laura Mitchell knew they were ugly because she had helped design them. They were not sleek or graceful like the alien vessels that patrolled Earth's seas. They were rough and brutal, welded together from stolen technology and human desperation. Their hulls were thick and heavy, built to survive rather than to impress. Their engines were too large, their weapons were too small, and their life support systems were barely adequate. But they worked. That was all that mattered. 12 ships launched from hidden facilities scattered across the dying planet. Each one carried 10,000 people, a mixture of soldiers, scientists, engineers, doctors, and civilians. They had been chosen carefully. Every person aboard represented some skill or knowledge that humanity would need to survive. Brooks was on the third ship to launch. He stood at a small viewport and watched the Earth grow smaller behind him. He could see the scars from orbit, the blackened patches where cities had once stood, the clouds of smoke that covered entire continents, the flashes of light where battles still raged. He had lost everyone he loved down there. His parents, his brothers, the girl he had planned to marry, all gone, swallowed by the invasion. He made a promise to himself in that moment. He would return someday, and when he did, he would make the aliens pay for what they had done. The Council fleet detected the escaping ships almost immediately. Hundreds of warships changed course to intercept. Their weapons locked onto the crude human vessels, ready to destroy them before they could escape. But the human ships had one advantage that the Council did not expect. Laura's fold drives were faster. They were cruder, yes, less refined. They burned more energy and stressed their frames more than the alien versions, but they were faster. By the time the Council weapons fired, the human ships had already folded space and vanished into the void. High Arbiter received the news with cold fury. "Find them," he commanded his admirals. "Search every system, check every planet. They cannot have gone far. Their technology is primitive. They will need to stop to rest, to resupply. Find them and destroy them." The search lasted years, then decades. The Council sent thousands of ships to scour the galaxy. They checked every habitable world within 100 light-years of Earth. They followed every rumor and investigated every anomaly. They found nothing. Humanity had learned something important during the occupation of Earth. They had learned how to hide. They had spent months living in tunnels and basements, moving only at night, communicating only in whispers. Now they applied those lessons on a galactic scale. The 12 ships scattered to the farthest reaches of known space. They did not settle on planets. Planets were too easy to find, too hard to defend. Instead, they hid in places that the Council would never think to look. The ship carrying Brooks found a hollow asteroid in a system with no habitable worlds. They burrowed inside, sealed the entrance, and built their new home in the darkness of the rock itself. Other ships did the same. Some hid in the hearts of gas giants. Others drifted in the vast emptiness between stars, their systems powered down to near silence. And in those hidden places, humanity began to grow. Cole was 17 years old when he boarded one of the refugee ships. He was 43 when he commanded his first combat mission. The years between had changed him. They had changed all of them. The refugees had become something new, something forged in loss and tempered by patience. They called themselves the Remnant because that was what they were, the remnant of a species that had been almost wiped out. But remnants can be dangerous. A single spark can start a fire that burns down a forest. Remembered Earth only in fragments. The smell of grass after rain, the sound of his mother singing, the feeling of sunlight on his face. Those memories felt like dreams now, belonging to someone else's life. The man he had become knew only the cold darkness of space, the hum of recycled air, and the constant training that prepared him for war. "We do not have enough ships to face the Council in open battle," Admiral told the Remnant's military council during one of their secret meetings. The old man was gray now, his body bent by age, but his mind was still sharp. "We do not have enough soldiers. We do not have enough weapons, but we have something they do not expect." "What is that?" asked. Smiled grimly. "Time. They think we are defeated. They have stopped searching. They have turned their attention to other matters. Every year that passes, we grow stronger. Every year that passes, they grow more complacent." The Remnant used those years well. They stole technology from Council supply ships. They recruited allies among the species that suffered under galactic rule. They experimented and innovated, combining alien designs with human creativity in ways that the Council had never imagined. Nelson was Laura Mitchell's best student. She had been only 15 when the invasion began, a brilliant girl who had already been accepted to university. Now she was a woman in her 40s, and she led the team that cracked the secret of zero-point energy. "The Council uses fusion reactors," explained during the demonstration of their breakthrough. "They are powerful but limited. What we have built draws energy directly from the fabric of space itself. It is unlimited. It is eternal. It changes everything." Within a decade, the Remnant had power sources that made the Council's technology look primitive. Within 2 decades, they had weapons that could crack planets and shields that could withstand direct hits from anything in the galactic arsenal. 50 years passed. The children who had fled Earth became parents, then grandparents. A new generation was born in the darkness between stars, people who had never seen blue skies or felt natural gravity. But they learned the stories. They watched the recordings. They knew what had been taken from them. And they were angry. Cole was 67 years old when he stood before the full council of the Remnant and presented his plan. "The Council has 17 member species," he said. "They control thousands of worlds and millions of ships. On paper, they are unbeatable." He paused and looked around the room at the faces of humanity's survivors. "But we have studied them for 50 years. We know their weaknesses. We know their supply lines. We know where their defenses are thin and where their leaders are vulnerable." He activated a holographic display showing the galaxy, marked with thousands of points of light. "We cannot fight them in a traditional war, but we do not need to. We strike everywhere at once. We hit them so hard and so fast that they cannot coordinate a response. We turn their own conquered peoples against them. We make them bleed from 1,000 wounds until they collapse under their own weight." The council was silent for a long moment. Then Admiral, now ancient and frail, spoke from his chair. "When do we begin?" Looked at the galaxy spread before him and thought of Earth. He thought of his mother's singing and the smell of grass after rain. "Now," he said, "we begin now." Attack began without warning. In 47 star systems across the galaxy, remnant warships emerged from folded space at exactly the same moment. They appeared like ghosts, materializing out of nothing, their weapons already firing before the Council defenders could even understand what was happening. The targets had been chosen carefully: shipyards where the Council built their fleets, power stations that fed energy to entire sectors, communication relays that coordinated their military. In a single synchronized strike, humanity crippled the nervous system of a galactic empire. Admiral Cole commanded the assault on the personally. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, a vessel called the Judgment. It was nothing like the crude ships that had fled Earth 50 years ago. The Judgment was sleek and deadly, built with technology that the Council could not match. Its zero-point reactors provided unlimited power. Its weapons could punch through any shield ever built. Its hull was lined with adaptive armor that learned from every attack and grew stronger. 300 ships followed through the fold. They emerged in orbit above a world that had never known war, a world whose people had believed themselves safe behind the greatest military force in galactic history. That belief died in the first 5 minutes. This is Admiral Cole of the Human Remnant, broadcast on all frequencies. His voice reached every ship, every station, every communication device on the planet below. 50 years ago, your council voted to exterminate my species. You came to our home. You murdered billions of innocent people. You burned our cities and scattered our survivors to the void. He paused and looked at the tactical display showing the fleet scrambling to respond. They were too slow. They had grown complacent after decades of unchallenged dominance. We did not forget, continued. We did not forgive, and now we have returned. The battle was short and brutal. The fleet was large, but their ships were old and their tactics were outdated. They had not fought a real war in centuries. They relied on overwhelming numbers and superior technology to crush any opposition. But now they faced an enemy that had spent 50 years studying their every weakness. Remnant ships danced through the formations like predators among prey. Their weapons tore through shields that had once seemed invincible. Their pilots flew with a fury that the aliens could not match. Brooks commanded a squadron of assault craft during the battle. He was 76 years old now, too old for combat by any reasonable standard. But he had refused to stay behind. He had made a promise on the day he left Earth, and he intended to keep it. Remember what they took from us, he told his pilots as they dove toward the enemy. Remember everyone we lost. This is our answer. His squadron destroyed 14 warships before the battle ended. The fell in 3 days, did not enjoy the destruction. He took no pleasure in watching cities burn and civilizations crumble, but he understood that mercy was a luxury they could not afford. The Council had tried to wipe humanity from existence. If even a shadow of their power remained, they would try again. High Arbiter escaped the fall of his aboard a command ship. He fled to the galactic core, where the Council had always believed themselves safest. But there was no safety anymore. The remnant was everywhere. The war lasted 3 years. It was not a war of armies clashing on battlefields. It was a war of shadows and strikes, of sabotage and assassination. The remnant appeared without warning, destroyed their targets, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. They could not be predicted. They could not be tracked. They could not be stopped. Tors led the uprising on Prime. She was 29 years old and had never seen Earth. Her parents had been born on a refugee ship, and she had grown up in the hollow heart of an asteroid. But she knew the stories. She had watched the recordings of the invasion. She understood what the Council had done to her people. Prime was a slave world. The Council had conquered it centuries ago and used its population for labor. They were not fighters by nature. They were gentle people who had been broken by generations of oppression, but showed them something they had forgotten. She showed them hope. You are not alone anymore, she told the resistance leaders in a hidden meeting beneath the capital city. The Council is falling. Their fleets are burning. Their leaders are running. If you rise up now, we will support you. We will arm you. We will fight beside you. The rose. Across the planet, slaves turned on their masters. Factories that had built weapons for the Council were seized and converted. Ships that had enforced galactic law were captured and turned against their former owners. The same pattern repeated on dozens of worlds. Species that had suffered under Council rule for suddenly saw their chance for freedom. They took it with desperate fury. High Arbiter made his last stand aboard his command vessel in orbit above the Council's capital station. The fleet that protected him was the last meaningful force the Council possessed. If it fell, everything fell. Cole led the assault personally. The battle lasted 6 hours. It was the largest naval engagement in galactic history, thousands of ships on each side fighting in the void between stars. The Council fought with the desperation of the doomed. The remnant fought with the patience of those who had waited 50 years for this moment. In the end, patience won. Boarded ship with a team of Marines. They fought their way through corridors filled with defenders, losing soldiers with every step. But they did not stop. They could not stop. Not now, not when they were so close. They found on his bridge. The Ancient was alone, his command crew dead around him. His bioluminescent tendrils flickered weakly, their glow fading as his life force drained away. Hal asked as approached, "You were primitives, you were nothing. We should have destroyed you in days." Removed his helmet and looked at the creature who had ordered the death of his species. He felt many things in that moment. Anger, grief, a strange kind of emptiness that came from finally reaching a goal he had pursued for his entire adult life. "You were right about us," said quietly. "We are violent, we are dangerous. We do not grow out of our nature, we sharpen it, we focus it, we turn it into a weapon." He knelt beside the dying alien. "You gave us an enemy to hate, you gave us a purpose. You turned us into exactly what you feared." "What happens now?" whispered. Stood and looked out through the viewport at the burning remains of the galactic fleet. Stars gleamed in the distance, cold and indifferent. "Now we make sure this never happens again," he said. His tendrils went dark. The High Arbiter of the Dominion, the being who had called for humanity's extinction, died on the floor of his own bridge. The Council was finished. The war was over. But the killing was not done. 100 years had passed since the day the aliens came. Hall stood on the observation deck of Memorial Station, looking out at the place where a world had once existed. There was nothing there now, just dust and debris drifting in the void, slowly spreading into a thin ring around a star that no longer had any planets to warm. That had been destroyed in the final days of the war. It was not the only one. 3 of the Council's 17 member species had been wiped out completely. Their worlds had been cracked open, their populations scattered or eliminated. 5 more had been reduced to isolated colonies on the edges of known space, too weak and broken to ever threaten anyone again. The galaxy that looked upon was not the galaxy that had existed when her great-grandmother was young. Entire regions were now dead zones, too dangerous to travel through because of debris fields and unstable gravitational anomalies. Trade routes that had operated for thousands of years had been abandoned. The great civilization that had ruled the stars for 12 was gone, replaced by silence and ruin. Humanity had done this. Was 32 years old. She had been born on Earth, in a city that had been rebuilt from ashes. She had grown up hearing stories about the invasion, about the heroes who had saved their species from extinction. But the older she got, the more complicated those stories became. Her great-grandmother had been Laura Mitchell, the scientist who had given humanity the technology to flee Earth and eventually to win the war. Laura had died 20 years ago, surrounded by family in a hospital on the very planet she had once been forced to flee. Her final words still haunted. "We became monsters to fight monsters. Never forget what that cost us." The memorial ceremony would begin in an hour. Representatives from a dozen species would gather to remember the dead, to honor those who had fallen on all sides of the conflict. It was supposed to be about reconciliation, about moving forward, about building something new from the wreckage of the old. But wondered if that was even possible. Admiral joined her at the viewport. He was the commander of the station's defense fleet, a quiet man in his 50s who rarely spoke about his past, knew that he had fought in the final campaigns of the war, that he had been present at the destruction of 2 council. She did not know how he felt about it. She was not sure she wanted to know. "The ceremony starts soon," said. "Will you be speaking?" Nodded without turning away from the viewport. "Someone has to remember why we are here." Was silent for a long moment. He stared at the debris field with eyes that had seen too much death. "Do you think they were right to fear us?" he asked. It was a question that had asked herself many times. She had studied the history. She had read the Council's records, their debates, their reasoning for the invasion. They had looked at humanity and seen a violent species that would inevitably spread across the galaxy like a disease. They had decided to eliminate the threat before it could grow. "Yes," she said finally, "I think they were right. They saw exactly what we were capable of. They just did not understand how far we would go." Nodded slowly. "My grandfather was at the Battle of the Core. He told me once that the hardest part was not the fighting. The hardest part was what came after. The choices we had to make about what to do with the survivors. The decisions about which species would be allowed to rebuild and which would not." Had heard those stories too. After the council fell, there had been debates about what to do next. Some had wanted to show mercy, to help the former council species rebuild and become part of a new galactic order. Others had argued that any survivors would eventually seek revenge, that the only way to ensure lasting peace was total elimination. In the end, humanity had chosen a middle path. Some species were spared, others were not. The decisions had been made based on calculations of threat and capability, cold equations that measured the risk of future conflict against the cost of genocide. Sometimes wondered if the people who made those decisions had lost something in the process, some piece of themselves that they could never get back. "My grandmother used to say that we lost the war even though we won it," she told. "She said that the aliens forced us to become something we were never meant to be. Conquerors, executioners, rulers of a graveyard." Did not argue. There was nothing to argue about. The human dominion, as it was now called, controlled more territory than the council ever had. Their fleets patrolled the void, enforcing a peace that was maintained through overwhelming force. The species that had survived the war lived under human protection, which was another way of saying they lived under human control. It was not the future that the refugees who fled Earth had dreamed of. They had wanted survival. They had wanted freedom. They had wanted a chance to live without fear. Instead, they had become the very thing they had fought against. Turned away from the viewport and walked toward the ceremony hall. The representatives were already gathering, a mix of humans and aliens united by the memory of shared tragedy. Some of them had lost entire worlds. Others had lost friends and family. All of them carried scars that would never fully heal. She took her place at the podium and looked out at the crowd. She saw old soldiers with haunted eyes. She saw young children who had never known the war. She saw aliens who flinched when humans walked past, their fear written plainly on their faces. 100 years ago, she began, her voice steady despite the weight of what she had to say, the Galactic Council voted to destroy us. They believed we were too dangerous to live. They looked at our history, at our violence, at our endless wars, and they decided that we would eventually become a threat to all life in the galaxy. She paused and let the words settle over the crowd. They were right. We were dangerous. We still are. When they came for us, we did not submit. We did not break. We fought with everything we had, and when that was not enough, we ran. We hid. We learned. We grew. And when we were ready, we came back and we tore their empire apart. Her voice cracked slightly, but she pushed through. We turned the galaxy into a graveyard. We destroyed civilizations that were ancient when our ancestors were still living in caves. We made choices that our descendants will debate for centuries. We became exactly what the Council feared. She looked at the debris field visible through the great windows of the ceremony hall. Somewhere in that cloud of dust were the remains of billions of beings who had lived and loved and dreamed. They were gone now, gone because of what humanity had done. But we are also capable of something that the Council never understood. We can remember, we can learn, we can look at what we have done and choose to do better. She straightened her shoulders. We will spend the rest of our existence making sure that no one ever forces us to become what we became again. We will build instead of destroy. We will protect instead of conquer. We will be the guardians of this galaxy, not its executioners." She stepped back from the podium. The ceremony continued. Speeches were given, memories were shared, tears were shed. Outside, the stars burned cold and quiet, indifferent to the beings who lived and died beneath their light. The galaxy that humanity now ruled was and broken, a graveyard of civilizations that had once thought themselves eternal. But graveyards can become gardens, given time and care. Looked at the debris field one last time and made a silent promise to the dead. She would not forget what they had done. She would not forget what it had cost. And she would spend her life trying to make sure that the galaxy never needed another graveyard. It was the least she could do. It was the least any of them could do.